And the thing about that teaching is it works often enough that people can go on teaching it. If it never worked, they couldn't. But it certainly does not always work. Amen? All right. And then they come up with a fearful catalogue of all the terrors that await the wicked. And what are they saying? They're saying, Job, this is what you can expect. Job 20, verses 20 through 29. This is about the wicked. I can't get to the whole context. Because he knows no quietness in his heart, he will not save anything he desires. Nothing is left for him to eat, therefore his well-being will not last. In his self-sufficiency he will be in distress. Every hand of misery will come against him. When he is about to fill his stomach, God will cast on him the fury of his wrath, and will rain it on him while he is eating. He will flee from the iron weapon, a bronze bow will pierce him through. It is drawn and comes out of the body. Yes, the glittering point comes out of his gall. Terrors come upon him. Total darkness is reserved for his treasures. An unfanned fire will consume him. It shall go ill with him who is left in his tent. The heavens will reveal his iniquity, and the earth will rise up against him. In other words, Job, that's what happens to the wicked, and it's going to happen to you. Now, Job's response is really quite interesting. Now, something very interesting that you probably never noticed. Eliphaz reveals one of the sources of his teaching, and it's an evil spirit. Turn to Job chapter 4, verses 12 through 16. Job 4, verses 12 through 16. Now a word was secretly brought to me, and my ear received the whisper of it. In disquieting thoughts from the visions of the night, when deep sleep falls on men, fear came upon me, and trembling, which made all my bones shake. Then a spirit passed before my face. The hair on my body stood up. It stood still, but I could not discern its appearance. A form was before my eyes. There was silence. Then I heard a voice saying, that is a visitation of a spirit, and it brought great fear with it. Now, this is what the Spirit said, and this is really the crux of the whole issue. Can a mortal be more righteous than God? Can a man be more pure than his Maker? If he puts no trust in his servants, if he charges his angels with error, how much more those who dwell in houses of clay, whose foundation is in the dust, who are crushed before a moth? And so on. So, what is the message? It's ridiculous and presumptuous for a man to claim to be right with God. No man can claim righteousness in the presence of God. And Bildad comes up with the same thing in Job 25, verses 1 through 6. Job 25, it's a short chapter of 6 verses. Then Bildad the Shuhite answered and said, dominion and fear belong to him, that's the Lord. He makes peace in his high places. Is there any number to his armies? Upon whom does his light not shine? How then can man be righteous before God? Or how can he be pure who is born of a woman? If even the moon does not shine, and the stars are not pure in his sight, how much less man who is a maggot, and the son of man who is a worm? In other words, it is ridiculous presumption for any man to claim to be right with God. And that's really, I believe, the basic issue that Satan is resisting. He ridicules any claim to be right with God. And it came from a spirit, but not a spirit of God. I would call it a religious spirit. I wonder if you ever had to deal with a religious spirit. I mean, there are so many of them in the Pentecostal and the charismatic movement, not to go further afield. They use wonderful language. The problem is it's too good to be true. And they use it to beat down other people. And that's really precisely the way Job's friends operated. I tell you about religious spirits. They're too good to be true. And they use their goodness to make you feel guilty. Right? If you haven't encountered it, I have an idea you will pretty soon. It's very deceptive, because like Job's friends, they use all the right language. They're more religious than God himself. And they cause no end of trouble. All right. Now, let me ask you a question. What is the Scripture's answer to can a man be right with God? Where would you look in the Bible for the answer? In what book? Romans, that's right. That is the theme of Romans. The whole issue of Romans is righteousness. Is it possible to achieve righteousness with God? And God says, yes, it is. And Satan says, no, it is not. And he uses religious arguments to make you feel guilty. All right, does that seem up to date to you? I am impressed that the book of Job, which is probably 4,000 years old, at least possibly, is so totally up to date, so exactly relevant to the situation that we find ourselves in today. I mean, you have to get behind the language. But I want to say, I believe that people in those days really spoke like that. They used poetic language. Somebody said, how was the book of Job preserved? I imagine it was preserved by memory. People that had memorized the whole book. That's how it came down before it was put in writing. That's my guess. You see, we in our Western culture, in some ways, are very primitive. We lack much of the refinement of older generations. You compare contemporary English with the English of Shakespeare. Our language is much less flexible. It's much less expressive. And there are lots of things we can't say. Now, when it comes to technology, we've got all the language we need. But when it comes to expressing finer emotions and really significant concepts, we are very short today. One of the things that troubles me, well, there are 2 or 3 words that are dropped out. For instance, most of the Bible translations today don't use the word beget. But there's no substitute. Became the father of is not by any means the same. I personally think, you can dislike it if I say, I think it's women's lib that has changed that. They don't want to acknowledge that there's a unique function of the man. Let me say something about the NIV. I use it often. I like it. It's a wonderful attempt to put the Bible in contemporary English. But it's very hard to use contemporary English and preserve the thinking of the Bible. Because thought and language are so intimately related. Let me give you one example. And I mean, I use the NIV, especially in my radio teaching. It's the version I use first and foremost. But where the old version says, the Lord of hosts, what does the NIV say? Who can tell me? It says, the Lord Almighty. Now, the problem is, there is a Hebrew word for Almighty which is different. But the word that's translated hosts in Hebrew is the word for army. It was in those days, in the time of Moses. It still is in modern Hebrew. It's exactly the same word, and it means an army. Now, if you don't want to say hosts, because it's Old English, what should you say? Army. But they don't say the Lord of armies. Why not? Because I think a lot of people don't like the idea that God is a man of war. There's a kind of pacifist idea of God that has crept into our thinking. And you see, it finds expression in the language we use. But God is a man of war. He's a commander. And he has weapons of war. And he's prepared to declare all-out war. And I believe he's going to do it. So you can say Almighty. You see, that sounds religious. It's nice. But the Lord of armies gets down to the nitty-gritty. Okay, there's no extra charge for that. Now, let's come to Job's response. And I've got, dear Lord, I've got 16 items. I'll try and go fairly quickly. Number one, Job's first response was reverent submission. He said, the Lord gave, the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. The second time his wife said, go on, curse God and die. Why should you want to live? And he said to her, you speak as one of the foolish women speaks. Shall we receive good and shall we not receive evil from the Lord's hand? And it says, in all this, Job did not sin nor charge God foolishly. His initial reaction was totally right. Now, I learned something from that because when my first wife died, it was the hardest experience that I'd been through. But I saw that Job gave me the answer. The Lord gave, the Lord has taken away. If we can trust God to give, we have to trust Him to take away. And that, for me, resolved the doctrinal problem. Still a personal problem. But I wasn't troubled by what had happened. All right. Secondly, in Job chapter 3, Job goes into a long lament. And he says things I don't understand. Because he says, I wish the day that I was born would be blotted out of the number of months. I don't understand how that could happen. A past day can be blotted out of the calendar. I don't understand. But I'm sure there's something about it. But he really lets go his feelings. And I want to say that is the right reaction. We are not Stoics. That's an alien, unchristian doctrine, Stoicism, that we never let anything affect us. We never get so involved in anything that is going to hurt us. Now, I've met Christians like that. And I've always seen there's a reason. They got hurt once. And their innate attitude is, I'm never going to let anybody get close enough to me to hurt me again. Brothers and sisters, I can understand that, but I want to say it's the wrong reaction. You cannot afford to shut up your feelings. You study the Bible, especially the book of Psalms, especially David, a great man, a man of action, a man of war, a man God loved. He poured out his feelings in tremendous language. And if we don't do that, if we bottle it up, we suffer. Something inside us goes sour. It's appropriate to mourn. When Moses died, the children of Israel mourned 40 days for him. They didn't move. That's the right way to respond. Let it out. Tell God how you feel. Don't hold it in. That's one thing I've noticed about Jewish people. I spend a lot of my time with Jewish people. I'm not Jewish, but basically, they let their feelings out. That's partly why they're such good actors. I mean, I don't say that cynically, and also, I know there are quite a number of Jewish people here tonight. I don't know whether you've noticed Jewish musicians, singers. They let everything go. They don't hold anything back. That's right. And in the church, we need a lot more confrontation. Don't evade issues. Don't be too polite. You've got to do it graciously, but say, I think you're wrong. You shouldn't have said that. You've hurt my feelings. Don't bottle it up. I read an interesting article by a medical man, I think he was a doctor, on the theme of lamentation. And his theme was, lamentation is a necessary part of the healing process. Don't stifle it. Let it out. And that's certainly biblical. You read the Psalms one time and see how many times David let it all hang out. Amazing. All right. So that's number 2. Job lamented. Number 3, he wanted to die. I won't turn to the passage, but there's various places here. What's the good of living? I've got nothing to live for. Let me get out of it. Let me get to a place where I have peace. I think that's deception, because I don't think the wicked For the unconverted do have peace after they've died. Then Job affirmed his righteousness. He would not back down in the face of all his critics and accusations. I think we need to read that. Job 13, verse 15. Talking about God, he says, though he slay me, yet will I trust him. Even so, I will defend my own ways before him. And apparently God likes that. He doesn't want religious hypocrisy. He doesn't want religious platitudes. He wants people to be honest. Job said, I've done nothing wrong, and nobody's going to make me say I've done something wrong when I haven't. Not even God. And then in chapter 27, verses 3 through 6. 27, 3 through 6. As long as my breath is in me, and the breath of God in my nostrils, my lips will not speak wickedness, nor my tongue utter deceit. Far be it from me that I should say, you are right. Till I die, I will not put away my integrity from me. My righteousness I hold fast, and will not let go. My heart shall not reproach me as long as I live. He said, you can go on accusing me, but I don't accept it. I have not done wrong. This has not happened because I've sinned. Was he right? You know why it happened to him? I'll shock you with the answer. Because he was righteous. See, that overthrows a whole lot of theories, doesn't it? And you'll find, as we'll see, God never did anything but uphold Job's righteousness. From the beginning to the end of the book, he said, my servant Job is right. Now that really staggers you, doesn't it? I want to say it again. Job's problems didn't come because he had sinned. They came because he was righteous. How many of you still want to be righteous? Amen. I do too. All right. The next thing that Job says is, God has not treated me justly. Job 27, verses 2 through 4. Now this is really astonishing, because remember, God said at the end, Job said what is right. So, Job 27, verses 2 through 4. As God lives, who has taken away my justice, and the Almighty, who has made my soul bitter, as long as my breath is in me, and the breath of God is in my nostrils, my lips will not speak wickedness, nor my tongue utter deceit. Far be it from me that I should say you are right. Till I die, I will not put away my integrity from me. Job knew he was righteous, and he was not going to change. And he said, God hasn't treated me justly. Was that true? It was true. Now this is going to shock you, but it was true. Turn to Job 2, verse 3 for a moment. Job 2, verse 3. Then the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil, and still he holds fast to his integrity, although you, Satan, incited me against him to destroy him without cause. That's unjust. Yes or no? Yeah. So you see there's a problem. But at least I got you thinking. There used to be the attitude amongst Pentecostals, at least, that when you went to church and parked your car in the parking lot, you could safely leave your mind in the car because you wouldn't need it in the church. That is no longer true. Jesus said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. You need your mind. Christianity is not a mindless euphoria. It's a challenge to intelligent thinking. All right. The next thing, Job longed for a mediator. Job 9, verses 32 to 35. He, God, is not a man, as I am, that I may answer him, and that we should go to court together. Nor is there any mediator between us who may lay his hand on us both. Let him take away his rod from me, and do not let dread of him terrify me. Then I would speak and not fear him. But it is not so with me. One of Job's frustrations was he could not get into the presence of God. He couldn't have a direct interview with God. He said, if only we had a mediator. You know the difference between Job and us? We have a mediator. Yes. I wonder if we appreciate that. All right. Job viewed God as vindictive and unconcerned. Job 9, verses 14 through 20. How then can I answer him and choose my words to reason with him? For though I were righteous, I could not answer him. I would beg mercy of my judge. If I called and he answered me, I would not believe that he was listening to my voice. For he crushes me with a tempest and multiplies my wounds without cause. He will not allow me to catch my breath, but fills me with bitterness. And then at the end of that chapter, verses 30 through 31. If I wash myself with snow water and cleanse my hands with soap, yet you, that's God, will plunge me into the pit, and my own clothes will abhor me. That's strong language, isn't it? All right. He complains that God uses him for target practice. That's remarkable, but as you see there, Job 7, verse 20. Have I sinned? What have I done to you, O watcher of men? Why have you set me as your target, so that I am a burden to myself? He said, God, you're using me as target practice. All your arrows sticking in me. Now, if you talk to God like that, you'd better be pretty careful what kind of a person you are. And then a scripture which has absolutely changed our attitude for Ruth and me. Something we had never seen. Job chapter 7, verses 17 and 18. Job is speaking. What is man that you should magnify him? In other words, why do you look at us with a magnifying glass? You magnify everything in our lives. What is man that you should magnify him? That you should set your heart on him? That you should visit him every morning and test him every moment? And it came as a startling revelation to Ruth and me that God visits us every morning. Let me ask you, will you be ready for his visit tomorrow morning? Because he'll be there. You may not be aware of it, but he checks on you every morning. And it says he tests us every moment. There's not a moment that God is not testing you. Everything that we do is undergoing a test. Now you could say that's awful, but I think what the Bible reveals is God tests us because he's proud of us. He wants to bring the best out of us. He has a much higher goal for us than we have for ourselves. And he will not lower his standards. Many times we can say to God, God, please, lift. Take the pressure off. God won't do it. Because he says, in essence, I've got a purpose in your life and I am going to work it out. Now you can absolutely turn your back on God and cancel the purpose. But I trust most of us would not wish to do that. But if you want God's purpose fulfilled in your life, then you've got to be prepared to be visited every morning and tested every moment. I can see that you're somewhat shocked. We were shocked when we realized it. But it's true. So when you wake up tomorrow morning, be prepared for God's visit. Because he'll visit you anyhow, but you may not even know he visited you. Which is impolite. Job says there's no justice on earth. Job 9:24. The earth is given into the hand of the wicked. He covers the faces of its judges. He is God. If it is not he, who else could it be? Now, is that true? Is there a lot of unjust judgment? here in the United States today in our courts? There certainly is. Generally speaking today, the law courts tend to have mercy on the criminal and no mercy on the victim. Is that right? Again and again and again. Dealing with drunk drivers. They get mercy time and time again, but the poor victims are not considered. Who's responsible? Job says, if it isn't God, who is it? It must be God. I hope you can see how relevant this is. All right. In the midst of it all, Job had the most glorious flashes of prophetic revelation. This is so characteristic of people like you and me. We're right down, we're depressed, we're moaning, we're complaining, we've lost the victory. And suddenly, for no reason on our part, we get this glorious revelation which changes our whole outlook in a moment. And there's one that's very familiar. It's not the only one, but we'll look at it in Job 19. As you know, it was turned into an aria in Handel's Messiah. One of the most beautiful arias ever written. Job 19, verse 25 and following. For I know that my Redeemer lives, and he shall stand at last on the earth. And after my skin is destroyed, this I know, that in my flesh I shall see God. In other words, no matter what happens to my body, it's going to be resurrected. And I'm going to come back with a body. And then he says, whom I shall see for myself, and my eyes shall behold and not another. How my heart yearns within me. I'm sure that stirs something with many of us. We'll die unless the Lord comes. Our bodies will decompose. But one day, they'll be raised up. And we shall see the Lord with these same physical eyes that we now use. In fact, I have a belief, a theory, that the coming of the Lord is as near for each one of us as the day we die. Because when we die, we pass out of time. There's no more time there. We close our eyes in death. We're in a timeless world. And when we are resurrected, we'll have different eyes. They'll be incorruptible eyes. They'll be eyes that don't need glasses. What will be the first thing that we'll see with those eyes? The Lord. So the New Testament saints like Paul and Peter, who believed the coming of the Lord was imminent, they were right. It's as imminent as the day you die, if the Lord doesn't come before. And Job, perhaps the oldest book in the Bible, has this clear, absolutely unmistakable affirmation of the resurrection of his body in connection with somebody he calls my Redeemer. You can't tell me that that's not by inspiration. How could it be any other way that a man in Job's situation at that time would have such a revelation? So, when you're in the midst of your mourning and your problems and your pressures, maybe God will suddenly give you a flash of prophetic revelation. And that will change everything. Not permanently, but for a moment. And as it were, you'll be transported out of time into an eternal situation. And you'll be able to see yourself face to face with your Redeemer. Now, the next thing Job says to his friends is, you have failed me. And I think we'd have to agree. He said it in a lot of different ways, but we look in Job 6, verses 14 through 17. To him who is afflicted, kindness should be shown by his friend, even though he forsakes the fear of the Almighty. My brothers have dealt deceitfully like a brook, like the streams of the brooks that pass away, which are dark because of the ice, and to which the snow vanishes. When it is warm, they cease to flow. When it is hot, They vanish from their place. He's talking in terms of a Middle Eastern wadi, a dry riverbed, which is filled with water in the winter season from the rain and the melting snow. But when it gets really hot and you really need water, there's none there. It's dried up. And he says, you like that. When I really need water, you're all dried up. You have nothing to give me. Very frank language. Job 16, verses 2 through 5. I have heard many such things, Job says. Miserable comforters are you all. Shall words of wind have an end? Or what provokes you that you answer? I also could speak as you do. If your soul were in my soul's place, I could heap up words against you and shake my head at you. But I would strengthen you with my mouth, and the comfort of my lips would relieve your grief. He said, you're not giving me what I need. You're just adding to my problems. I could do without all that. He said, the function of a friend is to comfort, not to accuse. I think some of us need to learn that. Perhaps I do. All right. Then Job, this is Brother Prince's language, rejects the prosperity gospel as unrealistic for two reasons. Number one, there are many examples of innocent people who suffer. Job 21, verses 23 through 25. Job 21, verses 23 through 25. One dies in his full strength, being wholly at ease and secure. His pails are full of milk, and the marrow of his bones is moist. Another man dies in the bitterness of his soul, never having eaten with pleasure. They lie down alike in the dust, and worms cover them. Two people, both die. One never had a day's problem, the other never had a day's happiness. But who can say that the one was more righteous than the other? That's a fact of life. In the ministry, we're continually meeting people who never seem to have known a day's happiness in their lives. And we don't say, you're wicked sinners, worse than all the rest. We have to say, we can't tell you the reason. We don't have the answer. We can tell you about God's love. But why this has come in your life, sometimes we can see. My book that I spoke about, Blessing or Curse, gives a lot of reasons, but it doesn't give all the reasons, by no means. One of the things I have to guard against is thinking that I can explain everything. Whenever I have that attitude, I discover very quickly I'm wrong. All right, let's look at Job 24, verse 1 through 12. Now, remember, he's dealing with the suggestion that the wicked are always punished and the righteous always prosper. And he says it's nonsense. It just isn't true. Thank God for somebody who tells it like it is. I mean, it's bad enough to suffer, but then to be told you oughtn't to be suffering just makes it worse. Job 24, 1 through 12. Since times are not hidden from the Almighty, why do those who know him not see his days? Some remove landmarks. They seize flocks violently and feed on them. They drive away the donkey of the fatherless. They take the widow's ox as a pledge. They push the needy off the road, so that the poor of the land are forced to hide. Indeed, like wild donkeys in the desert, they go out to their work, seeking diligently for food. This is the poor, the oppressed. The people who don't get a fair deal from society. Are there people like that in the modern America? There certainly are. They go out to their work seeking diligently food. The wilderness yields food for them and for their children. They gather their fodder in the field and glean in the vineyard of the wicked. They just get what's left over after the wicked have had all that they want. They spend the night naked, without clothing, and have no covering in the cold. They are wet with the showers of the mountains and huddle against the rock for want of shelter. Now, A lot of people are very busy with what's going on in what was formerly Yugoslavia. I'd like you to consider this is a pretty good description. Some snatch the fatherless from the breast. Well, wait a minute, let's look at verse 8. They are wet with the showers of the mountain and huddle around the rock for want of shelter. Some snatch the fatherless from the breast and take a pledge from the poor. They cause the poor to go naked without clothing, and they take away the sheaves from the hungry. They, the poor, press out oil within their walls and tread winepresses, yet suffer thirst. The dying groan in the city, and the souls of the wounded cry out, yet God does not charge them with wrong. Somebody said to me the other day, why doesn't God intervene in Yugoslavia? Because that's the situation. It's very vividly described. My answer would be, I didn't get it. What do you expect God to do? To blot out the whole company of people? To drop some kind of nuclear weapon on one side? Apparently, God doesn't do anything. I think this is a serious problem for a lot, especially younger people. They see the suffering and the misery. They say, where's God? Well, Job said that 4,000 years earlier. And it's not out of date. But he said, don't tell me that the righteous always prosper, or the wicked are always punished. He said, I've got eyes in my head I can see. I hope I'm not shocking you, but maybe I hope I am. I want to go for a moment, this is the only time I'll do it, away from Job to Psalm 73. You see, I think this is one of the great questions that humanity struggles with. Where's the justice of God? Why do the wicked prosper? And we know they do. And sometimes they're applauded for it. Psalm 73. Verse 2 and following. But as for me, my feet had almost stumbled. My steps had nearly slipped. For I was envious of the boastful when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. For there are no pangs in their death, but their strength is firm. They, that's the wicked, are not in trouble as other men, nor are they plagued like other men. Therefore pride serves as their necklace, violence covers them like a garment. Their eyes bulge with abundance. They have more than heart could wish. They scoff and speak wickedly concerning oppression. They speak loftily. They set their mouth against the heavens, and their tongue walks through the earth, and the psalmist says they are getting away with it. Why? And he nearly lost his faith. But then he says this, in verse 15. If I had said, I will speak thus, behold, I would have been untrue to the generation of your children. When I thought how to understand this, it was too painful for me. Until I went into the sanctuary of God, then I understood the end. The only one that can explain things like that to you is God. Now listen, this is their end. Surely you set them in slippery places. You cast them down to destruction. Oh, how they are brought to desolation as in a moment. They are utterly consumed with terrors. As I see that, these people who are wicked and prosperous live out their whole lives flourishing in their wickedness. And you say, doesn't God care? And God says, the moment they step out of time into eternity, they'll be plunged into everlasting darkness. But it doesn't happen in this life. I'm going to read those words again. Surely you set them in slippery places. You cast them down to destruction. Oh, how they are brought to desolation as in a moment. They are utterly consumed with terrors. But the judgment is not in time. It's in eternity. Now, we're getting near the end of this. Be patient. Job recalls his former prosperity and glory. And the whole of chapter 29 is a description of how he flourished and prospered Oh, that I were as in times past. And then he goes into all the details of how he was respected, honored, prospered, was able to help all sorts of people, minister to all sorts of needs. You see, it's bad enough to suffer, but it's worse still when you've prospered. The psalmist said in Psalm 102, "The Lord has lifted me up and cast me away." That's when it really hurts. When you know the Lord lifted you up, and suddenly he dumps you. That's a test. Now let me say, I'll come to this again, God will not test you above what you're able to bear. You're not Job, and God won't put you through the same tests as Job. Job was a very unusual character. But God will put you through the tests that are needed to make you what he wants you to be. All right, let's go on. Job then describes how he is despised and mistreated in his own community. We'll look at Job 30 for a moment. Verses 1 through 5. Job 30. Verses 1 through 5. He's just described all his prosperity. And now he says, "But now they mock at me, men younger than I am." And in the Middle East, that is terrible. For the younger to mock the older. And then he says, and he describes the lowest of the people in the community. And he says in verse 9, "Now I am their taunting song. Yes, I am their byword. They're all speaking about me. They abhor me. They keep far from me. They do not hesitate to spit in my face." That's another feature of the Middle East. That people who are regarded as failures, it's made very clear to them that they are. People don't use tact. They let them have it. "Because God has loosed my bowstring and afflicted me, they have cast off restraint before me. At my right hand the rabble arises. They push away my feet, and they raise against me the ways of destruction. They break up my path. They promote my calamity. They have no helper. I'm treated like the lowest of the low in my own community, where I was honored and esteemed, and where I blessed and helped many, many people. The very same people that I used to help are the ones that are now treating me with contempt. Don't tell me that isn't hard.